Hello there, listening audience. This is Michael Cross with another episode of Unlock the Door Radio, where I start off every episode quoting Benjamin Franklin that it is the duty of the citizenry to question authority at all times, whether that be government, whether that be, established religions, even non-religions, and also the media, especially the media, because otherwise you're just going to take their words for it, and not sure you really want to take the word of the 5 various mega corporations that own almost all the media in the Western world. Tonight, we are going to be, we have a special guest, Pedram. Well, I'm not going to use his last name because, I don't know. There's no need to in reference to these kinds of sensitive subjects. But Pedram's he's a musician. He's in a group called In Reverence. When I put this on YouTube, I'll put a link to some of the works. And he's going to be talking tonight about, of all things, the Middle East. Because, Pedram, why are you interested in the Middle East?
Yeah, I'm actually Middle Eastern myself. Not from the Middle East, but I was born here in Sweden. My parents are from Iran, so I kind of have like a connection to that area.
Okay, when we start out, let's just say your parents moved here, or to the West. Were they motivated by trying to get away from like the Islamic government there?
Yeah, my dad he came first to Sweden to study, and when he was studying here in Sweden, the revolution in Iran happened, and he went back, and then he saw that everything was, changed in a very negative way. So he decided that it was in his best interest to establish his family here in the West instead.
Okay, all right. So you would describe yourself as pretty secular then?
Yeah, kind of.
Okay, so, I'm just going to kind of jump into this. It seems like if we look back about 10 years ago, there were more secular governments in the Middle East than there are today. I mean, for better or for worse, Saddam was pretty much Islamic in name only. Gaddafi was more of a ideological person. I mean, he was Islamic, but he also seemed to be more, I would say, pseudo-intellectual. Of course, we have Assad. He is, for the most part, secular. What's going on? Is there this rebirth of a desire for religious governments there, or is this being fomented, do you think, by various interests that may not actually be connected to the Middle East, notably places, entities such as the United States, NATO, and so forth?
Yeah, it's kind of like religion is just a tool in this process, and it's used to control the masses somehow. But I think like it's not always what we hear in the media. The media always kind of like paint a black and white picture of who's the bad guy and who's the good guy, and it's not always that easy. It really kind of like transcends beyond that, and to find out you have to like research for yourself different subjects around the issue, and go deeper into history above all to understand the complexity of the situation.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when we're looking at a situation like Syria or with Libya or something like that, it's not all of a sudden, it's not a clear black and white, here's a good guy versus a bad guy. And of course, when America supports someone, it's always the good guy, right?
Yeah.
How does America do that? I mean, the predictions you would see in like a tabloid or something like that, those are open to error, obviously, but it seems like America just gets it right every time for the last 50 years. Just Whoever America sides with is automatically the good guy.
Yeah. Well, America, it's, how can you explain this? It's like, if we look at America today, the current superpower today is America. And, America, just like any other country, they have, their their national interests, and to establish their national interests, they have to do whatever it takes to get there. And with this said, lying in the media and creating false allegations for invasions or maybe stuff like that, it's happened many times before in the history. And if we look at today, it's not any different, actually, I would say.
Really interesting. I'm going to go back to something I mentioned earlier. You're a member of a band, so
Yeah.
you know how the media operates. You kind of know who controls it and so forth. I mean,
Yeah.
It must be hard to kind of start scratching your way from beginners to trying to make it big.
Yeah.
Could you? It is kind of a connection, really, in the sense that if you're not part of the establishment already, it's really difficult to break into it, isn't it?
Yeah, kind of, but breaking into the establishment. Well, it's kind of easy to suddenly wake up and see that you're a part of the stream that moves, along the mainstream stream, and it's very easy to blindly follow a path that has been carved out by society for you, and everything that you do basically is, it's, I don't know how to say it. It's it goes along.
Well, it's harder to buck the trends that whatever. I mean, there's basically 5 corporations that own almost all the media in the Western world.
Yeah.
And that includes Western Europe.
Yeah.
And essentially they set not just, musical taste, saying that this is what people should be listening to, this is what's big right now, but also political taste.
Yeah, and you have to understand that, corporations, just like any other corporations, they have in interest to, make a profit, and whatever the way they can make this profit, it's debatable, but I don't think it's in order to, show exactly the truth. The truth is not always the thing that's more profitable, if you understand what I'm trying to say. It's
Well,
so kind of creating false allegations for invasions, these kind of thing, they profit, companies that produce weapons, and these companies that produce weapons, they might be using the media to create these kind of false allegations in order to gain their profit. And so it's a very hierarchical system that uses money and power as a tool. Basically, that's it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think back to the slave trade, where in the Caribbean you grew sugar to be made into rum. You took the sugar to the colonial ports, such as Boston, and you produced the rum. You sent it back to England to sell it. Yeah. And then you took the ship down to Africa to pick up more slaves to take to the Caribbean to, make more sugar so you could make more rum to sell. It was it was a circular trade. And what you're describing sounds like you have the media, which is giant corporations that have their special interest. You have what Eisenhower called the military-industrial, and some people now call it the military-industrial police state apparatus, which is, they want to sell weapons.
Yeah.
And so then you create an issue and you promote that in the media, which of course most people aren't going to research. They're going to accept what they hear on their nightly news or state TV or something like that, if you're talking about Europe. And then people are going to say, yeah, we do need bigger defense budgets. We need to have more high tech weaponry. Look, the Russians might get us, or ISIS might get us already.
Yeah, and it's like they're using fear to kind of propel their market somehow. And you know, if you look at places like Syria and Iraq, you know, it's very, very like complex. The Syrian people is very diverse. They have many ethnicities, just like, you know, anywhere else in the Middle East. So it's not like black and white. Here's we're going to topple Assad, and Assad is a bad guy. You know, Assad is, you know, a very evil dictator, if you ask me. But the revolution in Syria has got to the point where, you know, it's only either to choose between ISIS or Assad's government, and it's I think it's pretty horrible.
Yeah, and then now we have a situation where ISIS seems to be carving out a huge chunk of Iraq.
Yeah. And
yet, I don't know, it seems weird to me that at this point, maybe it'll change by the time this airs this week, but that the U.S. seems more than willing to use drones all over this region. But yet right now is like, no, we're still looking at what we should do about what's going on in Iraq right now. We're studying it as they. I mean, the only airstrikes I've heard of recently, Syria assisted Iraq in knocking out some ISIS fortifications along, you know, near the Syrian border. So they used their air force. You may see Iran joining in on this, but it seems for some strange reason, I mean, it can't be that, well, we don't want to get involved in another war, but you got drones now. You're not having to worry about losing any pilots or anything. And my understanding is the Iraqi government would not turn down any kind of offer of assistance right now.
No, absolutely not. And, you know, you mentioned Iran, which it's quite interesting, of course, because the whole thing with ISIS and the war in the region is turning into a religious conflict, where you know, we have Sunni militias that are backed by, you know, Wahhabi extremists from you know, Saudi Arabia, and they have the money to, you know, supply these rebels with whatever they need. So they are supplying them, and you know, they're just growing bigger. And ISIS, they are very, very skilled actually at organizing their resistance. I've heard a rumor that ISIS was the same insurgency that fought the American soldiers when they were in Iraq. I don't know if that's true, but if it is, you know, they've been doing this for a long time, so they know how to fight. They're kind of used to it right now. And Iran, they have especially the Iranian government, they have strong feelings about this because they are the Shia version of Islam, and they are like the natural enemies of ISIS because of their extreme like viewpoint of their version of Islam. So of course they'll try to help the Iraqi government fight off these rebels, and also to benefit their own national interest. Iran is just like any other country, so if they can, can use the situation to get more influence in the region, they will. And they are doing it right now. They sent troops in order to help Iraqis fight off the ISIS rebels just recently.
Yeah, it seems strange that what you might wind up with
Yeah.
is a situation where I don't think Iran would ever stand by and let the Shia areas of Iraq fall to ISIS.
Yeah, exactly.
That's totally out of the question.
Yeah.
And if they did wind up going in, it might wind up being a situation where Iran winds up essentially, well, that area of Iraq becomes part of Iran.
Yeah.
And that area of Iraq is where there's two areas of Iraq that have all the oil. The very south, which is Shia dominated,
Yeah.
and the very north, which has the Kurds.
Yeah.
And the Kurds
That
are not going to
could
allow
happen.
the Kurds aren't going to allow themselves to be taken over by ISIS.
Yeah. Pretty much, and the Kurds, they're doing that pretty much to like save their own skin, if you say it like that, because they have, if the rebels, if they take the Kurdish area, there isn't going to be like any kind of mercy, if you say that. Kurds are a people that have always been repressed by their neighboring countries in many centuries, So if ISIS gets a hold of the Kurdish areas, that might be the end of the Kurds, if you say it like that, which is quite sad, actually.
Well, the irony is, first of all, I don't think they're going to wind up being taken over. I think they're more unified and so forth. But the other irony is that I remember a few years ago when Turkey threatened that if the Kurdish area became its own country, they would invade. And of course, because they don't want a Kurdish homeland set up, because then that chunk of Turkey, which is like almost half of it, that is Kurdish majority, would then see this as a way of deciding they want to join them.
Yeah.
And I don't know if people really they think Middle East, well, if Turkey gets involved in this whole mess, well, Turkey is partially in Europe. And that is right on the southern borders of Europe. You could have a really nasty situation if all of this region falls into various fighting factions.
Yeah. And Turkey feels very strongly about this because they have also a big Kurdish minority group in Turkey. And what they might fear is that if the Kurds in other countries like Syria or Iraq gain independence, they might trigger the Kurds in their own country to carve out a piece of their own land. So that's why they're very sensitive about this issue. Mm-hmm. And that's what I think the reason behind why Turkey acts like the way they do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, they're in their own self-interest too. Although it could be said that part of this is Turkey's fault because they went along with America, and actually a lot of the aid that's been, in Syria, it was, what do they do to vet these organizations? Asked by a roll call vote, who's an Islamic terrorist and who's a freedom fighter? Raise your hands. That obviously, only an idiot would believe that ISIS has only received American weaponry by picking it up. Oh, look, someone left these guns or rockets or something here by the roadside.
Well, it's both ways. U.S. they decided to arm the Syrian rebels at the beginning of the Syrian revolution, and at the beginning, the rebel groups, they weren't that organized. They didn't really establish. Here is our resisting group. We have these kind of points. They just transcend and formed, and during revolutions they always get pulled into the political extremist spectrum. This always happens in the wherever you can see a revolution. There have always been a polarized political spectrum, and the extreme sides, they always organize and form a resistance. And when you give weapons to these kind of different groups, they will, spread along and, be passed along to other rebel groups. And this is how ISIS gets a hold of their weapons. Mm-hmm. Right now, Obama administration, they came out a proposal to arm the Syrian rebels even more with like $50 million of worth of weapons.
Yeah, 500 million actually.
500 million. Oh shit!
Mm-hmm.
So it's even more than I thought. You know, it's like, what the hell? You know, you're just pulling more gasoline into the conflict, and you're gonna inflame it even more. How is weapons gonna sending even more weapons gonna help diffuse a conflict? I don't think it's gonna end well at all.
Well, I think a lot of Americans don't realize this, that what you said is a good point. When everything was splintered originally, it could have just been 6 or 7 guys saying, let's fight Assad, you know, and you have these little militias. But the people that really knew what they were doing were the people who had battle experience, whether they were from Syria, most of them weren't, but mercenaries who had battle experience killing American soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan. They heeded the call. You know, they came and, were fighting Assad, wanting to bring him down. And if these are the guys who have the experience, I mean, it's been mentioned in some parts of the U.S. media, although it's a media that's usually only read by those that are really into foreign policy, not Joe Sixpack watching the football game. But the people that have the experience in Syria, the ones that have made gains, although they seem to be losing them, but the ones that made gains initially were the ones who had battle experience fighting the U.S. And yet the U.S. was arming these guys because they said, well, they're effective. They're more effective than these other guys who are just like, hey, we got some guns, but we don't know what to do with them. Well, these guys knew how to use strategy, and they had training in various camps in Afghanistan and so forth.
Well, officially they did not, but they kind of did behind the scenes. If you read about it, you find out that, eventually weapons and training, it's passed along to these guys, whether we, trying to avoid the truth or not.
Oh, absolutely. Now, I'm wondering, I mean, is it now time for people to start looking at stocks for defense industries? Because we got a situation. We got the situation. I'm not going to go into it, but the whole situation when it comes to Russia and Ukraine, I think a lot of that's being orchestrated behind the scenes, and really, gasoline being poured on the fire, primarily by the West in that situation. But yet now you see the media saying, well, we need to have more. We need to have more weapons. We need to have bigger and better airplanes and missiles and tanks and ships, because now the Russians might, take over the world or something. And if you have a situation where you have this big chunk of, the Middle East, the northern Syria, and at least the Sunni sections, the western part of Iraq, controlled by a group that makes the Taliban look like a bunch of hippies on a camp out.
That's when things are getting really, really nasty.
Yeah, but it's going to make big profits there's countries out there. The United States, France, Sweden, these guys make a bundle off military contracts.
Yeah.
And so
it's a never-ending profit. So wherever they can find conflict and sell their weapons, they will do it. And it's as long as we don't have any like ethnic dilemma or ethnic law or something that that prohibits these kind of sales. We're not gonna see an end to this kind of conflict.
Oh no, there's too much money involved in it, and then you throw in, like I said, the surveillance state in the United States, where they've spent billions and billions and billions of dollars on perfecting ways to spy on people. I mean, no one goes onto their social media nowadays and thinks no one's listening or no one is recording what they're putting out there. I mean, this is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And of course, they're going to push this too. Like, well, we need to have more surveillance because you never know when ISIS might be taking over Des Moines, Iowa, or some absurd like that.
Yeah.
So it just seems like you've got a lot of money resting on all of this.
That's true. But this conflict won't be solved by more weapons. It will only be inflamed even more. And, it's always the winner that writes the history book. So whoever gets the control of that region will see like a justification of why this group made this kind of action. And, when time passes along, the people in that region will like be more convinced that this was the right thing or this was the wrong thing, or whatever the winning group will decide it will be.
Well, now I have a question here. There's several countries that, well, I guess all talk of right now at least is put on hold of more sanctions or going after Iran for its nuclear program. That's not a big issue right now for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
But if ISIS continues, and I don't know if it will or not, they might be, fought back. But what happens then to some of the countries that, like Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and Israel? I mean, these are countries I don't think the West would sit back and let them be taken.
Yeah, no, not really. Saudi Arabia, because they are like an important ally for the United States, and Israel, they're a natural ally of United States as well. But I don't think when ISIS are fought back, I don't think like things will improve for the better somehow. I think maybe they will have some kind of like understanding of each other, better understanding of each other, these countries in the region. But I think pretty much, the old problems, they will eventually seem like something more important to focus on. So this whole nuclear issue, it will be refueled, and the discussions about invasion, they will start again eventually, and I think things will turn to the way it was before ISIS.
So you think it'll go right? Well, that goes back into what we're saying about the military-industrial complex, because Iran feels the same way about Iran. I mean, not Iran. Yeah, Russia and China do not want Iran to be attacked by the West.
Yeah, exactly.
On the other hand, you've got Saudi Arabia and Israel, which they're not enemies of Russia or China, but they could get some they could get some fallout from this whole ISIS thing. So, in a really weird way, it almost would be that maybe in a couple of years you might have more of you know how it used to be with the Cold War, you had Europe.
Yeah.
And it was the center stage for everything between the old Soviet Union and, of course, the United States and Western Europe. But you might have Middle East suddenly being that kind of powder keg with Russia and China with its interest, and then the United States with its interest. And then you throw in something like ISIS that could stir up one side against another.
Yeah, pretty much. Well, I don't know really. Like Middle East has always been a very sensitive point of conflict. There's been a lot of war during history, and it's never been really easy to establish.
Mm-hmm. What
a kind of like.
What would you like to see happen?
How do you put it? Establish a kind of like. What I would like to see happen.
Yeah.
Well, I would like to see first all these countries getting together, putting their differences aside, and fighting this ISIS madness, getting them out of the way, and eventually starting to peacefully dismantle their conflicts, because when we've seen like violent conflicts that come out, and when people make a revolution, and all of these stuff, you can see that the more violence that is getting into this area, the more things will turn to the worse. And as long as we can peacefully dismantle conflicts, we might be able to, you know, turn this whole area to a secular and kind of like westernized, like you know, area. It will be pretty much just like the West, you know, only if we manage to calmly, you know, disintegrate all of these conflicts.
Well,
Because they can be solved peacefully, and it's only just a matter of, you know, people just trying to accept and understand, you know, that we're not all that different from each other.
well, if you take a look at, you can take a look at things like if you look at travel magazines and stuff from the 1970s. Iran, Afghanistan, they look like you were just the way people dressed and did their recreation, and their general outlook seemed to be very Western. I mean, it was like you were in Europe.
Exactly. And that's how things, when conflicts are born and, you know, things turn violent, this kind of thing happens because people, they are just running to the political spectrum, and they don't realize that when you go to an extreme political spectrum, things will, you know, afterwards they won't be that beautiful, you know.
Mm-hmm.
A person I knew, I don't remember who told me, but someone told me that during the end of a revolution, you'll always find either a rainbow or like a horrible version of hell. And unfortunately, it's always like the horrible version of hell. Too often of the times, never revolutions or conflicts, they never end.
Yeah,
never end well.
We see that in Libya today. I mean, that's been turned into like a tribal wasteland. I mean, people are all kinds of groups fighting each other and dying every day.
Yeah, it takes a while to get back on their feet, and you know, when they've gotten back on their feet, they need to further diffuse conflicts in order to be able to evolve into like a better society and less violent events and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, we're running out a little bit out of time because I know you have a busy schedule right now, and we'll discuss this in more. I'll discuss this in more detail after the break. But it's too bad you don't have the ear. You know, you don't have a way of communicating this to the United States government.
Well, I don't think they would have listened actually, because they have their own interests to go after. So, you know.
Yeah, and note that sometimes that interest is not for peace and prosperity in a region.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, not to go on too much, but there's what they call the Wolfowitz Doctrine, which
What's that?
Well, it was formulated right after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and it basically said that the U.S. foreign policy should be designed to make sure that no country or entity ever winds up being a strong competitor to the United States ever again. Mm. So essentially, you know, whenever a country starts getting powerful, in a sense, you're going to try to undermine it.
Yeah, exactly. And we can see that today between U.S., Russia, China, and in the region they have Iran as their competitors. So that's why they need to undermine the power of the Iranian government.
Yeah. Well, I guess maybe my hope would be that every region, every country in the world would realize that it's in its own best interest to help one another instead of always trying to undercut and destroy the other country.
Yeah, pretty much. We have to evolve as a race, humans as a race somehow, and by killing each other, we won't get there. You know.
No, absolutely.
We could do amazing stuff. We could colonize other planets. We could discover new, places other than this planet. But that demands that we all work together and not bashing each other's head in, whether it be religious or political reasons, I don't see any sort of like excuse to take a human life.
No, absolutely not. And like you said, I mean, we're on the verge of scientific innovations that could, well, we're already nowadays it's common to read reports that, you could extend the human lifespan, get rid of illness, be able to have inventions that will make a lot of the stuff we worry about today obsolete.
Yeah.
Or we could wind up destroying one another and living like some sort of scene from The Walking Dead for the next 20 years.
Imagine all the defense budgets of the world being put into an organization like NASA, for instance. Imagine what we would have been right now. That'll be a totally different place to be.
Yeah, instead of blowing things up, if you were actually trying to colonize and use the resources that are outside of us. I know, of course, people have been conditioned. In the 60s, they were conditioned to feel that this was the future. This was infinite possibilities. And now we're conditioned, oh, well, that's just science fiction and that's silly. And kind of weird how everyone's been kind of drawn back to kind of a plastic material live for the now ideal. Yeah. It's sad.
Yeah, we're kind of like we're no different like that no different than the mammals that live on this planet. We're like competitive with each other. We form groups that if we meet each other, we might turn like friendly, or we might be competitive towards each other and start killing each other. And this is the kind of way that we are waging war against each other.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I know you told me previously that your time was limited here, so thank you very much for sharing your insights here on this issue that I really wish more people would study up on.
Yeah. Thank you for having me, Michael. It was very interesting to talk to you.
Yeah, well, thank you. And like I said, I'd encourage people to, well, I'll put a link, when I put this on YouTube, I'll put a link up to In Reverence so they can see some of your stuff on YouTube.
Check it out.
I think that was quite interesting insights that Pedram gave us. And I'd like to use the last segment of this show to go into a little bit more detail and really zero in on many of the problems I see with U.S. foreign policy at the moment. And I use the term foreign policy in a way that, well, I guess by definition it's foreign policy, but if you define policy as something that has something behind it, a foundation behind it, then it really isn't policy. It just seems to be do this and do that and make a mess of things, essentially, and then afterwards wonder what the heck happened. Or, I mean, if you want to get into conspiracy, it could be a situation where anarchy and chaos and creating Hobbesian nightmares in the Middle East is the ultimate goal. That, I think, I don't know which is more disturbing. The idea that we have no coherent foreign policy whatsoever, and it's just like letting a toddler go in, amongst fine china and just see what happens, or if it is a policy of destabilization. I mean, I can't tell the difference when you take a look at the Middle East right now. The thing is, I would encourage people to take a look at a documentary that on the Syrian situation. Now, it's not an American documentary, and well, I guess that's probably why I'm encouraging people to take a look at it, because it goes into details about the history of Syria and the things that are taking place there, the political movements, the religious differences, the socioeconomic differences, the ethnic differences, and it does so in a very fair way. It presents both sides. It's called A History of Syria. You can just look that up, A History of Syria. It's a BBC documentary, and I think it's hosted by Dan Snow. And basically, I think after you watch that, you'll get the idea that this is a very complex situation in Syria, and one that is not solved by just going in and taking a side and basically trying to topple the government and then see what happens afterwards. I mean, if we take a look at all the differences there, the major groups in Syria, as defined by religion, are the Alawites, who are a branch of Shia Islam, and they're a minority, but they are in charge of the government. Then you have the Sunni population, which is the majority, and then you have a rather large Christian minority, around 10% of the population, and a scattering of other minority groups. Now, ironically, the Assad government, both Bashir Assad and Hafez Assad, his father, who died a few years ago, they tried to set up a more nationalistic government that didn't really look so much at religion. It wanted to hold everyone together, and so there's a lot of religious tolerance in Syria. So the Christian minority, the Christian minority was in Iraq up until Saddam was overthrown, can enjoy all the same privileges as a Muslim citizen of that country. And so the Christians, as well as other minority groups and Alawites, are kind of unified behind Assad. Now, that's not to say all the Sunnis are against Assad. You generally find that the upper class, the middle class, the business class Sunnis tend, and also the more secular, I guess that kind of goes hand in hand, the more secular Sunni population, more Western-oriented, for no better term, favors Assad as well. Now, those aren't the people that we are funding. Those aren't the people that are being funded by the West and the United States. The people that are being funded are the Free Syria Army. And the problem with that is, as I stated in the interview, is that you can't just go amongst a group of rebels and then start asking, okay, who's for democracy and who wants to set up a theocracy that's going to make Afghanistan's Taliban system that existed before the American invasion look like something that is democratic. Now, the problem is there are various factions, and ISIS is from one of those factions that was fighting in Syria. Now, I will note, this particular group, well, at least according to what the media says, is so radical that even the Al-Qaeda forces are against it. Now, just keeping that in mind, where do you think they get their arms? Now, it doesn't have to be directly. It does not have to be directly. Okay? I mean, if you're talking about Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and other countries in the region that have been assisting the rebels, quote-unquote rebels in Syria, then often the go-between in the area is going to be the United States, either directly or indirectly. And again, is this just a hatred of Assad? Let's just knock Assad out and just kind of worry about those weapons afterwards? Or is it calculated that if you get every one of those ethnic and religious groups at each other's throats, then what you'll wind up with is a total chaos in which no one single group will be able to bring everyone together. I'm hoping that that is not what the United States really wants in that region. For one thing, what are you going to do with all the displaced people? I mean, is Europe suddenly going to get millions and millions of people knocking at the door because they're fleeing for their lives, is the United States. Is that people don't want to be raising their families in a situation that they could be shot, kidnapped, whatever, and you don't even know what group is which. If someone picks you up off the street and says, "Well, are you a Christian?" Are you, probably if you say you're a Christian, you're in bad shape no matter what. But if they pick you up off the street and say, "Are you Shia?" and they have to be a Sunni group, then you're dead. If it's vice versa, you might be dead as well. The thing is that creating chaos in a region is not to America's best interest. Take a look at what ISIS is doing now. Now, is America, I've heard some commentators say that the United States is really behind ISIS, wants it there to take this big chunk of land, and that maybe deals have been made or so forth. You got to admit, they have pretty good weapons, and it can't just be, matching weapons and cars and trucks and so forth that they just pick up off the streets. They look like they're pretty well financed. And so do we want someone that wants to reestablish the caliphate, taking over the Middle East and all of the secular gains that have been made? And I mean secular in that, people at least have a level of freedom. Women don't have to be dressed in burqas or these kind of things. Is this something that's going to be lost? That freedom of choice, whether if a person wants to wear a burqa or a person wants to, practice a very conservative form of Islam or whatever. That's their right. But when it gets into the point where it's legislated, where you have Sharia law, where you have no choice, then I think that's going to be very bad for that region, and certainly against our stated goal of human rights. It seems like the United States right now is really making a big push for such things as, for instance, gay rights. Well, a lot of these countries have a death penalty for if you're caught being homosexual. It seems contradictory unless really the ultimate goal is that it's better that the people in the region are fighting and killing each other than it is for any kind of unity. And that seems very immoral to me. Now, the thing that you're going to have in this region as well, which really scares me, is that once, let's say ISIS is successful and unifies itself, it takes over a huge chunk of the Middle East and starts threatening various neighbors, especially with all the weapons they seem to have. And of course, we've heard the various theories that many of the weapons from Benghazi that were given by the United States to get rid of Gaddafi, many of these heat-seeking missiles that can knock out passenger planes and so forth, that these have found their way there, but that now you have a framework, an infrastructure, a terrorist infrastructure, in which weapons, very dangerous weapons, are now in the hands of people who really do not like the West, and they don't like the United States. And I'll say this, they don't like any of the countries that really they see as opposing them. And this could set the stage for problems in the future in which we're going to see more freedoms taken away, because it's all of a sudden going to be, oh my gosh, Al-Qaeda can get us, or ISIS is going to get us. We already see last week that there was the incidents that, I think it's still going on, that airports out of Europe going into the United States, passengers have been subjected to far stricter searches. And also, you can't take a laptop or a cell phone on a plane that's not charged. Now, the thing is, if you have this new boogeyman in the Middle East, this new threat, and no one seems to be willing to ask the question, where did they really come from? We don't have really hard-hitting documentaries and so forth in the regular press the corporate press that seems to want to ask these questions. I would tend to think it'd be very important to know what the true origins of these groups are. How hard would that be? I mean, heck, a couple of weeks ago, some Mormon lady was excommunicated from her church because, something about recruiting people to a movement to ordain women. And I looked up the article, and there were hundreds and hundreds of news items out there dealing with that particular case. And then if you start looking for news items that really will go into a comprehensive, thorough investigation of what's going on in the Middle East, at least when it comes to the corporate media, you don't find it. Now, what is it more important? What goes on in a church that affects, the people that belong to that church, and they do have a free choice. They can either belong to it or not. Or something that is going on in a geopolitical hotspot of the world in which much of the world's oil supply is there. You have a lot of weapons in the region. You have very, I would say, unstable governments that have had to keep power. Both friends and allies of the United States have had to use equal amounts of force to stay in power. The Saudis are not, peace-loving in the respect of, allowing peaceful demonstrations and having a society that's open to dissent. Certainly not anything close to the United States. I would actually argue that Assad's government is far more democratic, far more open. But the United States, of course, is an ally of Saudi Arabia, so you're not going to see too much said about that. Now, the thing is, this region, the probability of problems that will be associated with the United States, I think, are pretty massive, because it seems it's very easy for the media to extrapolate a crisis somewhere in the world, raise the people's level of fear. And again, another documentary I'd really encourage people to look up. It's a BBC documentary as well. The Power of Nightmares, especially part 3, The Power of Nightmares. Fantastic on how psychology of fear is used today by the Western governments to stay in power. And I don't mean all Western governments, but primarily the UK to a certain degree, and of course the United States. There's always another terror threat, another, problem that you got to watch out for. And when you create this kind of mentality, people are going to be scared continuously. It's going to be like 1984, where you come on the telescreen and you're talking about all of these conspiracies and you're talking about all of these threats to your government. And one week one week you're at war with one coalition in the world, and then the next week you're at a war with another one, but you're allies with the one you were enemies with the week before. This perpetual state of war and fear. Now, we know what constant stress and fear does to the human body. It tears it down. It lowers your immune system. It makes you more vulnerable to heart attacks, strokes, and all manner of autoimmune diseases. Think about what that does to a society where you're constantly where your media focuses on, has these cheap, what I would call really cheap, not well made TV series, really hyping up the threat from all these various groups, both inside and outside the United States. You've got people constantly worried. Just like in the 1980s, where kids were scared to death of a war with Russia. Actually, they should be more worried nowadays, considering U.S. policy in the Ukraine. But that's another story. The thing is that if you have a situation where everyone's constantly afraid, then you're going to have a situation where you can't maintain an empire such as the United States based solely on fear. It doesn't work. Even during the Depression, I have to say this, Roosevelt did not hype fear. In fact, he said, what was that phrase? Fear was the enemy, but there is nothing to fear but fear itself, something like that. A real strong emphasis on not being paranoid. But nowadays, that seems to be what keeps the military-industrial surveillance state going. Keep that fear level up. And if you have a policy around the world that's whipping up problems in the Ukraine, that's whipping up more problems in the Middle East, then that just keeps the thing rolling and intensifies. Well, anyway, I think we've come to an end of our time here. But take a look at those two videos. Just check them out. And I think you'll find them very interesting. And it'll shed a lot more light on what's going on in that region of the world and also in the United States on these policies than anything you're going to see in the network news. Anyway, take care. And I hope you'll be back next week for another episode of Unlock the Door Radio right here on UCY TV.
In the letter from Iraq's UN ambassador Mohammed Ali Al-Hakim to the United Nations, he wrote that the 40 kilos or 88 pounds of uranium compounds kept for research at a facility northwest of Baghdad are now in the hands of the insurgent group Islamic State, formerly known as ISIS, which is attempting to overrun the country. The UN International Atomic Energy Agency responded, saying that it believes the low grade of the material does not pose a significant security risk. However, Al-Hakim stated the materials obtained can be used in manufacturing weapons of mass destruction with the required expertise, and importantly warned they could be smuggled out of Iraq given the country's current instability. Now, this Sunni Muslim group known as the Islamic State is an al-Qaeda offshoot. It's spearheading the takeover of large areas of Iraq and neighboring Syria. The group captured the facility in early June. 2 bunkers inside of it are believed to contain 2,500 degraded rockets filled with the deadly nerve agent sarin and mustard gas. U.S. officials have downplayed the risk, claiming the materials are too old to be useful. But regardless of what the IAEA or the United States government says now, the fear remains that with the required expertise, these could be developed into something dangerous and smuggled across the border. And here's why. The Islamic State group is currently using weapons it recently seized in Iraq to intensify its offensive in Iraq and Syria, according to many media reports. With crises carrying out across both those countries and Libya and Gaza, the fact remains that these militants have a growing interest in chemical weapons. They've seized materials and are potentially on the road to any of these hotspots. That's why statements of the materials age isn't doing much to allay Iraq's concern and those of many other nations, concerns some seem willing to ignore.
ISIS recently said that it has acquired a chemical weapons facility and 2,500 degraded weapons. Does the State Department have a comment on that? And what is the potential fallout of acquiring those weapons and this chemical facility?
Well, first, let me note that there was a copy of a letter, and I know you're aware of this, but just so everybody is aware, of a letter that the Iraqi permanent representative to the United Nations sent to UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, which was circulated yesterday to members of the Security Council, which outlined this. The purpose of the letter was to notify the international community of the seizure of University of Mosul facilities containing nuclear materials in June and to request international assistance. In typical fashion, these requests are sent just directly to the IAEA and they look into them. They believe the material involved to be low grade and not presenting a significant safety, security, or nuclear proliferation risk.
For more news, visit youtube.com/pigmine5.
This is Ozzy Skateboard.